Okay. We are approaching the end of our talk. I'm glad for your um, for the fact that you're intrigued apparently by what we discuss, and I want to finish with the issue of identity, which I think is key to anything that is to happen or not happen. We have been discussing that Bulgarians have some uh, there is polarization in society, and there is some difficulty uh, to grow in such a situation in which you are constantly diverted into some uh, weaponized notions. I wonder whether Bulgarian identity can be how can Bulgarian identity be affirmed in a situation in which there is war between, as we said, West and East or center and periphery. How can Bulgaria have added value even uh, through what we are when we are in such an environment in which there is difficulty to form society, to have social capital, there is difficulty to expand beyond the limits of your in group, whatever, even if it's a national in group, it's still an in group. What's your thought about Bulgarian identity in these conditions and the way forward for this identity, let's say?
Hmm. There are certain phenomena, certain things in Bulgaria that remind me of Scotland when I was a student or a very young man several decades ago, when Scotland was trying desperately to differentiate itself primarily from England, its dominant neighbour, uh, and was thinking in terms of breaking away. Uh, I could see how aspects of Scottish culture, its folk music, were being distorted and homogenized and uh, in an attempt for Scotland to sell itself as something distinctive from England. Um, it was all bagpipes and kilts and songs about the mountains and the purple heather and things like this. I can see this in Bulgaria as well. You know, uh, how you using these visible aspects of your history and your culture to try and identify yourself. Uh, but it can sort of lapse into a style of self parody sometimes. And it becomes a bit tacky, if you go to Bulgaria's Black Sea coast, uh, or other tourist centres, you you see how the souvenirs or souvenir shop is selling exactly the same things. The folk restaurants are all very similar to one another. There's very little to distinguish them. Uh, so at this point in time, there seems to be an abject lack of imagination or innovation in the interpretation of Bulgarian culture. But that happened in Scotland. And then look what happened in Scotland. It emerged as a powerhouse, um, uh, politically very strong in relation to England. So I think there's hope for Bulgaria, uh, but I think it's going to depend on innovators, on certain people um, with a certain level of international status, a certain visibility, using their Bulgarian identity in a more subtle, more nuanced, more realistic way. I mean, for instance, Georgy Gospodinov just won the International Booker Prize for literature, and there was a great big fuss made about it in Bulgaria, about it representing the way that Bulgarian literature is at the zenith of international literature. So it was all about Bulgaria, Bulgaria, Bulgaria again. But Georgi himself was didn't put it across that way because it didn't make any sense. You win literature prizes for innovation, for originality, not for representing a literary tradition. So the way it was presented in Bulgaria was nonsense. But in his own way, and through his modesty, he said something about Bulgaria that perhaps the populist version doesn't say. Uh, so I think there are those people out there who are good representatives of Bulgarian identity, Bulgarian dynamic identity, an identity that is looking to the future instead of clinging to some imagined past. Uh, I think it's going to take time, Vladimir, to tell you the truth. I mean, I'm talking about a situation in Scotland that prevailed 3 or 4 decades ago, and Scotland did change. It found itself. But like Bulgaria now, it took a lot of muddling around and a lot of crass attempts at identifying yourself culturally on the world stage. And a lot of braggadocio. Bulgaria, it's got to stop trying to be something that it isn't and accept what it is before you can actually show yourself successfully. You can't pretend. And I think that's the mistake that Bulgaria is currently making.
I see here a lot of issues, and I can't help asking you something more difficult, at least for me. Maybe you know the book by R.D. Laing, The Divide Itself,
Yes.
um, which is a book related to psychiatry, but basically it is, at least in my view, some kind of attempt to reconcile situations in which somebody has a split identity, and to make such a person move on and develop so that eventually there is growth within this person in which there is this split identity. And I ask that because I have the feeling in Bulgaria now the polarization is very high, and there is this division center, periphery, which is transformed and molded into the division West Russia, or Soros Russia, if you wish, whatever their different definitions. And I can't help thinking that when there is split identity, that when there is such a strong polarization, it's very difficult to do anything. You are advised, when you engage these people, you are asked, are you from our side? Or if you are not from explicitly from the one side, you're from the other side. But uh, and some people make a choice and choose one side or the over the other. But I think that if simply the good side is chosen, let's say the more modern side is chosen, then the energy which is moved into the system, it goes to one side, and the other side is alienated from this transformation. So for me, at least, there is this provocation or challenge, how to remain somehow connected with the whole society when I'm engaging another country, how to not play one element or one tendency against the other, but to somehow speak to all. Because at least for me, this is one of the problems. There is some low energy in Bulgarian society, and this division is exacerbated by the low energy. So I don't know
Mm-hmm.
if you get my point, but I can give even a better example. Maybe you're familiar with the situation in Iran, where there were these protests by young people and related to women's rights, etc. There are situations in which polarization is very high, and for me, that is preventing really the growth of, um, let's say, the identity growth, or the growth of
Mm-hmm.
the personality behind the identity. So how how could that be changed? Isn't it too long game to play, or is it really possible to engage or somehow be related to the whole society, not only to the presumably more modern part of it?
Um, I think Bulgarians are encouraged, as you say, to openly state what they are as opposed to who they are. Uh, it's almost as if they're forced to wear a badge or a label because of this tribalism, this polarization that you refer to. Uh, and I think what needs to happen is maybe more Bulgarians need to rip that label off quite demonstratively and say, no, I'm not playing this game anymore. I'm not taking sides. I'm simply going to be what I want to be. And I want my achievements in my work to speak for me, like Gospodinov, as opposed to actually having to align myself with some group that I don't have any affinity with. Uh, but that that takes confidence. You know, it takes courage. It takes a lot of faith in yourself, and I don't currently find a lot of Bulgarians behaving that way. Uh, the the ability to just be satisfied with who they are and just get on with life, as opposed to having to flourish, wave their flag or flourish their badge. Uh, Maybe it doesn't help that we're now living in this age where uh, platforms like Facebook and Instagram are encouraging you to actually wave a badge in public. That doesn't help. Um, but I'm sensing change. No, I do mix with a lot of young Bulgarians who are just tired of this. And I think maybe through this resignation, uh, it'll just result in a sort of mass shrugging of the shoulders and say, look, enough. We're just going to get on with our lives, uh, make the best of our own personal skills, uh, have the relationships that we want to have, uh, explore the areas of enterprise we want to explore, follow the opportunities that we want to follow, instead of having it dictated for us by the prominent tribes in Bulgaria. I think it's going to be an act of resignation, an act of defiance, an act of solidarity with yourself and with others like you, rather than something more demonstrative, something more theatrical, something more political, something more tribal. It's the antithesis of that. It's people just saying, I'm just getting on with life. Sorry, I'm just getting on with life. I don't need to prove anything.
Your words are very good for ending of this long talk, but I can't help adding something because we are also thinking, at least I'm thinking in Bulgarian Romanian terms. And when we speak about identity, there is this issue that identity should allow for some, at least in my view, for some energy, some experience, some maybe lessons to enter from the world beyond, which could be other nation or could be even other the group beyond the world beyond your in group, etc. But uh, this process, in my view, is stuck by what could be seen as trauma, for lack of better term. Basically, trauma creates some inability to connect in a rich living way. It closes the person, closes the horizon of experience. And in the case of Bulgaria, once again, if we return to this polarization, uh, it's not very clear where is the trauma, at least at this moment. Um, some people maybe are more open to the idea that there is some, they call it maybe Russian trauma or some experience from socialism, from or from the current Russian state, the Putin ideology, whatever they call it, conservatism, whatever. And other people tend to associate the trauma with the Western infusion in the country, the destruction which took place in the transition. Um, and maybe that is one of the problems, at least if somebody unexperienced wants to connect to Bulgarians, it would have been very easy if it's clear what is the trauma, where you stand with regards to this trauma. But in our case, we have some people who maybe have one or the other trauma, but they have different attitudes towards this trauma. Some people are proud of having it. Some people are proud in denying the West or in fighting for democracy in their social networks. Some people may feel ashamed. They have the trauma, but they also want to somehow maybe disconnect, and maybe they can't do it easily. Some people may be at peace with their trauma. Maybe they're just living, as you say. They're, as you said, people should just be. They may just be, but the trauma is part still of their identity as a person. And even if they are at peace with it, it limits, in my view, their experience. So maybe that is too complex an issue which I suggest, but I'm looking for here for some solution. To what extent this connection with the world beyond, let's say, with the region, for lack of better idea, in my case, um, how could it be made so that it could generate more energy for this change? Because we have also this problem that we have learned too well our lessons of socialization. And when we go out of our country, let's say, it is immediately sensed that we have different school in our formation of identity, and other people who are not professional in their international relations, they just feel we are different, and they may say, start asking, are you, what do you do with Russia or whatever. They may hit us at our sensitive places without being able to connect with us as well. So I don't know if you understand, but it's a very complex issue to generate energy and bring change when the trauma is already existing.
Hmm. I'm thinking. I think anybody who is an individual has trauma in their past somewhere, either because either something that happened during their childhood, something that happened when they were young children being raised, but maybe they were neglected or abused, or didn't feel the appropriate level of attachment with their parents. Uh, Learning to accept that trauma, uh, give it a name, and realize that it's part of you and it affects your current decisions, uh, memories of it, and pain can be triggered in current times. Uh, Accepting it can have quite a powerful transformative effect on you as an individual. Now, if we're talking about shared trauma, uh, trauma that's quite widespread in Bulgaria, and you're not the only person that talks about this. I mean, I mentioned Georgi Gospodinov. He talks about this existential sadness and the need to face it, uh, and say, yes, maybe as a people we are disappointed at the state of things. Maybe promises that were made to us have not materialized. Uh, Maybe things look bad at the moment, looking around at the crumbling architecture and the state of the roads, and the fact that Bulgaria doesn't seem to be making much of a contribution on the world stage. We're not as well off as we would like to have been. Uh, when we go overseas, where we feel inadequate because the other people are more sophisticated and outgoing and worldly wise and cosmopolitan, uh, and exploratory. Um, I, I think it would help if, as Gospodinov suggests we should, Bulgarians should do, is to name it. Yes, we are sad about the state of things. And then start from that low platform and give up the labels, give up the pretense, give up the 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 attempts to paint a rose tinted picture of Bulgaria with its glorious past and its proud tradition and everything, and just accept that your country it occupies quite a lowly position, because then you've got a level platform on which to build, as opposed to pretending you're something which you aren't. I mean, it strikes me that a lot of young Bulgarians who I've known who have gone overseas come back, and they give this performance of being a Westerner. And it doesn't convince me, because it is too much of a performance. No Bulgarian should be more Western than I am. So I sort of say to them in the kindest possible way, oh, knock it off, give up. Yes, I accept that you travel to the United States. You don't have to keep mentioning it in every second sentence. Yes, I know you've done this and you've done that and you've done the other. I'm not impressed. Just be who you are. You've got a lot to offer your country. You, you've got experiences that you brought back with you. You've perhaps got a superior education based on the fact that you studied in the United States and things. Put it to use here, and just stop the pretense, please. Stop the performing. Uh, because that does suggest you're compensating for something. That does suggest that the trauma of having been born in lowly Bulgaria, in Rusi, or some other town that doesn't live up to the standards of London or Edinburgh or Venice or Copenhagen. Uh, you've got to knock this chip off your shoulder, I think, as a Bulgarian.
Um, I didn't know if you agree with the idea that Bulgarian identity has certain element of splitness or being divided. Uh, in any case, I'm curious if somebody has this specifics or some society has this specifics of having relatively equal division between center and peripheral, whatever you call them, elements of the identity. What are the strong sides of such um, identity? Does it has a strong side, or is maybe it has only weak sides? Maybe it's you're unable to fit then into a world which has a dominant element in its identity.
I'm not awfully sure what you mean by the Bulgarian split identity, which makes it sound like some sort of schizophrenia or something. Uh, I think Bulgarians from an early age, and as they go through the education system, uh, are subjected to an element of local chauvinism, uh, and they're encouraged to go along with it. Uh, and perhaps that provokes them to participate in a level of pretense. But I don't think that necessarily means that they as individuals have a split identity. Uh, I think if anything, it stunts their own potential. It prevents them from realizing what they're capable of and what they are as individuals. Because from an early age, they are encouraged to be, I don't know, representative Bulgarians. They've got to be the best type of Bulgarians that they can possibly be. Uh, no, no, there's no obligation to be like that. I think young Bulgarians, if they were allowed to be who they actually are and play to their strengths and develop their own potential, would be far better advertisements for Bulgaria than having to uh, collude with this pretense that Bulgaria is something that it which it quite clearly isn't.
Okay, really final question. We are now in a situation in which there is war in Ukraine, and as we discussed throughout the interview, political fight in Bulgaria is also strong. But I somehow I'm curious when you think about the future, let's say next 5 years or some kind of uh, relatively near future. Um, what changes do you expect to happen in our country, in Bulgaria, in which we both live?
Mm. You mean changes that are perhaps provoked by what's been happening in the Ukraine? Um,
Maybe, but not only in
uh,
social terms, identity terms, if you wish. If I'm not boring with this issue,
but no, I mean, no, I think what the war in the Ukraine has brought into very sharp focus was the economic fragility of, uh, well, not just Bulgaria, the entire European Union. Um, uh, and the fragility of being dependent on great big long supply chains bringing um, goods and commodities from all over the globe. Uh, it's impacted on the price of basic household needs in Bulgaria. Um, and I think it's going to provoke Bulgarians to sit back and say, um, and I think I don't think this is unique to Bulgaria. I think a lot of the ordinary populations in a number of European countries are going to ask very big questions or make very big demands about the economic formula in the European Union and in Europe, uh, about some of the neoliberal assumptions. And I think this might even provoke uh, a little bit more interest in uh, the development of local resources and local capacity, and less dependence on uh, the global market as orchestrated by the big powers. I think it's going to provoke discussion about a greater level of self-determination, and greater productivity at local levels that benefit local communities, instead of this dependence on the big players. In terms of identity in relation to the Ukraine, uh, I think it's going to provoke Bulgarians and other populations in this part of the country, most particularly at this point in time, the Moldovans, to 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 see how vulnerable they are in relation to the big powers. And I think it's going to create maybe a greater doggedness, a greater determination in the local spirit not to be the playthings of those great powers any longer. I think it may provoke Bulgarians to say, well, what have we got to offer our own population? What can we make for ourselves? What can we make in cooperation with Romania? Uh, should we review our relationship with Turkey? Uh, should we here in Eastern Balkans be more capable of standing on our own feet and doing things for ourselves and making our own decisions, and not having to genuflect and ask for permission of the bigger powers? Uh, there was a book written by Ivan Krastev, and an American academic, called "The Light That Dimmed" or something like that, that focused on this growing disillusionment with the West, starting to see that the West itself has big problems, and it's maybe not the model that we wanted to aspire to. So I think Bulgaria, like a lot of other countries, is going to look to its own resources, uh, and ask questions about its identity in relation to these Western powers, and to the world as a whole.
Thank you very much, David, for this long talk, for patience, for resilience, and in my view, for providing food for thought, because I think that was our common intention when we embarked on this discussion. Um, I invite our listeners and readers to follow our channels on social media, The Bridge of Friendship and Cross Border Talks. And I think our interest towards Bulgarian, Romanian, other societies at the margins or more to the center of Europe will remain, and maybe we'll have more observations to make.
Oh, absolutely. I agree that this was really an exploration of issues uh, for which neither one of us has particularly positive answers. Uh, uh, Issues that are big, challenging, frightening, intimidating perhaps, but issues about which we've got to start asking questions and saying to ourselves, so where are we going? Something's got to give, you know. Uh, and we've got to face up to these challenges in this country and this part of the world. So it's been a very stimulating conversation. Thank you, Vladimir, for inviting me.
Thank you, David, too. And you're a friend and on important interlocutor for my media always.
Thank you, Vladimir. Thank you.